Stage 2 LOX load is complete.
There it is. The first and second stages are now fully loaded with over 1 million pounds of rocket-grade kerosene fuel and liquid oxygen.
And while it is pretty cloudy today, you can see the white clouds forming around the vehicle on our launch pad right now. This is totally normal. Those clouds are made up of chilled gas from above the surface of the LOX tank that is vented overboard
gas close up
to maintain pressure in the tanks as needed. And when that vented oxygen mixes with the warmer California air outside, it condenses into those clouds that you're seeing. So we're standing by now for confirmation that Falcon 9 is in startup at the T-1 minute mark.
Falcon 9 is in startup.
Good call out there. Falcon 9 is in startup. That means the internal flight computers have taken over the launch countdown. We're now just waiting for the final call from the launch director.
LD is go for launch.
And great news there. All systems are go for launch of Transporter-14.
T-minus 30 seconds.
T-minus 15 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ignition. And liftoff of Falcon 9. Go SpaceX, go Transporter-14. Vehicle pitching downrange. MOD chamber pressure is nominal.
We are T plus 40 seconds into flight. Falcon 9 has successfully cleared the tower and cleared the fog. We've got a great view there.
Nominal.
After lifting off from Space Launch Complex 4 East at Vandenberg Space Force Base in California. We are now currently throttling down to prepare for max Q. That's the point of maximum aerodynamic stresses on the vehicle. Max Q is reached when the air density of the atmosphere decreases faster than the increasing speed of the rocket. We're coming up on max Q here in a few seconds.
Max Q.
And there we've passed through max Q.
Coming up next, we'll have several events happening in quick succession, starting with MECO, followed by stage separation, SES-1, and then the boost back burn. Main engine cutoff, or MECO, is where all 9 Merlin 1D engines shut down to slow the vehicle down in preparation for stage separation, which is where the first stage separates from the second stage.
Started.
Then the MVAC engine on the second stage will light, which is called out as Second Engine Start 1, or SES-1. This engine burn, lasting several minutes, will propel the second stage and the payload to orbit. The boost back burn will then assist the first stage in returning to its recovery location on our drone ship, Of Course I Still Love You. Then the fairing will jettison from the second stage, as it's no longer needed to protect the payloads once we are in space. Later, those fairing halves will separate about 30 seconds after SES-1, so keep an eye out for all of those events coming up shortly.
MECO.
Stage separation confirmed.
Evacuation.
And there we've had MECO stage separation. On your right-hand screen, you can see the MVAC engine igniting. On your left-hand screen, you can see the grid fins deploying on the first stage. which will soon make its way back down to Earth for a landing on Of Course I Still Love You. Coming up next will be fairing deploy in a few seconds here.
Fairing separation confirmed.
Great call out and great live view of fairing separation.
And as a reminder, those fairings will make their way back to Earth for recovery. The next major milestone coming up is entry burn on our Falcon 9 first stage, which is scheduled to occur around the T+6 minute mark. The entry burn is used to slow the first stage as it heads back towards our drone ship, Of Course I Still Love You.
Vehicles are on a nominal trajectory.
We had some good callouts that both vehicles, both first and second stage, are on nominal trajectories.
And we are currently in our first MVAC burn, and this burn should last another few minutes. And the next milestone coming up for the first stage will be the entry burn, coming up in about 2 minutes from now. Today's Falcon 9 will be performing a couple more burns to make its way to the drone ship, Of Course I Still Love You, the next up being the entry burn, and then followed by the landing burn.
The first burn, known as the entry burn, slows the vehicle down before hitting the denser parts of Earth's atmosphere. Without this burn, we'd only be using the atmospheric drag to slow down Falcon 9, which would add extra stress to the vehicle.
Following entry burn, the booster will initiate the landing burn, which should slow the vehicle down even more for a successful landing. Those white puffs that you see coming off of Falcon 9 are cold nitrogen gas, which helps with attitude control.
Just under a minute away from that entry burn beginning. And again, you can see on your left-hand screen a view from the first stage vehicle as it makes its way back down to Earth. On our right-hand screen is the second stage, looking at the MVAC engine there, still burning. We have a couple more minutes burning on that engine until the first SECO, which is the second stage engine shutdown. Just about 10 seconds away from that entry burn on that first stage. The first stage is just using its grid fins at the moment to help guide its way back to the drone ship, and this entry burn will help slow down the vehicle.
Stage 1 entry burn startup.
Stage 1 FTS has safed.
There's that call out, and you can see on your screen that the engines have ignited on the first stage vehicle. This should just last about 15 seconds for this burn.
Stage 1 entry burn shutdown.
And you heard that call out, as well as saw that the engines have cut off on the first stage vehicle, ending the entry burn for the first stage today. As mentioned earlier, we are scheduled to land on our drone ship, Of Course I Still Love You, and this would be the 26th flight and landing for this specific booster.
And during the landing burn, we are expecting the shutdown of the second stage MVAC engine. This is known as Second Engine Cutoff 1 or SECO 1. We are about 30 seconds
Stage
away
1
from
transonic.
about 30 seconds away from the landing burn.
Stage 2 internal guidance. Stage 1 landing burn.
Stage 2 FTS has safed.
And there you just heard that call out for the landing burn start on the Falcon 9 first stage. Again, this is the final burn that this booster will execute before touching down.
Stage 1 landing leg deployed.
Seco.
Stage 1 landing confirmed. Nominal parking orbit.
And there you just watched as Falcon 9 touched down on Of Course I Still Love You, marking the 26th landing of this booster. We also had Seco 1, which is second stage engine cutoff. Coming up next, we have the second burn of our MVAC engine on board the second stage, or SES-2, and that'll happen around T plus 51 minutes. And we did confirm that we did get a good nominal insertion.
Before we head into a coast, we want to celebrate the Falcon program on recently reaching 500 completed missions. Over the last 17 years, these 500 Falcon missions have restored human spaceflight to the United States, built the Starlink low Earth orbit constellation to provide low latency, high bandwidth communications from orbit, and with recovery and reuse, has radically reshaped the spaceflight industry, making the impossible possible on the road to rapidly reusable rockets. Go Falcon and go SpaceX.
3, 2, 1.
First privately developed launch vehicle to reach Earth orbit from the ground.
And liftoff of the SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket. Falcon has landed. Copy, Dragon is in orbit.
Dragon, we're go for launch. Let's light this candle.
Vehicle is in startup.
T-minus 30 seconds. Rock, verify range, go.
Range green.
10.
My computer's in control of the vehicle.
9. Launch directors, go for launch. 8. 7. LD, verify, go for launch. 6. 5. 4. 3. 2. 1.
Congrats again to our SpaceX team. What an incredible ride it's been together. We're expecting now our first batch of deployments to begin today at about T plus 54 minutes. We'll be back at about T plus 50 minutes to bring you live coverage of SES-2. Until then, enjoy our new space tracks, and we'll see you soon. Welcome back to our live coverage of the Transporter-14 mission. It's been a great launch and overall mission so far.
That's right, Tyler. We've had an on-time liftoff at 2:25 p.m. Pacific time. We recovered the first stage on our drone ship, Of Course I Still Love You, which was its 26th launch and landing for this booster. And we also had a successful first burn of the MVAC engine on our second stage. Now coming up next will be, and followed by a good coast phase, which entered about a 40-minute coast phase.
We're expecting the second ignition of our Merlin vacuum or MVAC engine here shortly, followed by our first batch of payload deployments. If you're just joining us, today's flight is part of SpaceX's rideshare program. Our rideshare missions launch multiple small satellites into orbit using a single Falcon 9 rocket.
Nominal orbit insertion.
And we just had ignition of our second stage engine. We had SES-2 followed by SECO-2 and a confirmation of good orbital insertion. Now with that burn complete, we are on track to start our first wave of payload deployments in just a few minutes. And there you can see on your screen some of those payloads attached to the Falcon 9 second stage.
Now, as a reminder, today we are sending 70 payloads to orbit, including CubeSats, microsats, reentry capsules, and orbital transfer vehicles, carrying 3 of those payloads to be deployed at a later time. There will be a total of 66 separate deployment events today, and for this first batch, we're expecting 30 separate deployments.
These will individually separate from Falcon 9's second stage, one right after another, and we should hear callouts as the payloads are deployed. Additionally, we are expecting to have live views for most of these deployments today, and the first deployment sequence will begin with Quick 3, manifested by ExoLaunch, and will conclude with Dragoon, manifested by York Space Systems.
So we're expecting the first of those deployments in just under a minute and a half.
If you're just now joining us, you are watching the Transporter-14 mission. This mission carries several payloads for multiple customers today, and we should have some live views. We are expecting payload deployments to start in about 45 seconds from now, and there you can see a live view on our second stage looking forward at our payloads. You're going to see some different views and some different payloads still attached to Falcon 9's second stage. Again, we will begin deployments in about 30 seconds or so, and they will be one right after another, so we should get some really cool live views of each of these CubeSats, microsats deploying here shortly.
Quick 3, separation confirmed.
And we just heard confirmation of Quick 3 separation beginning our
Connector
payload deploys.
IoT-10, separation confirmed. Connector IoT-11, separation confirmed. Mobius 1, separation confirmed. UND Roads 1, separation confirmed. Connector IoT-12, separation confirmed. Good. Ancestor Kila Kila and Ridusat, separation confirmed. Jack 001, separation confirmed. Hyperfield 1B, separation confirmed. TPA1, separation confirmed. Pierre, separation confirmed. Doothsat2, separation confirmed. Satmar, separation confirmed. Connector IoT9, separation confirmed. Autopup2, separation confirmed. BRO18, separation confirmed. Valme, separation confirmed. UND Roads 2, separation confirmed. Fossasat 21, separation confirmed. Arkstone, separation confirmed. Ion SCV Passionate Polar, separation confirmed. IOD2 Startical, separation confirmed. Forge Star 1, separation confirmed. MMS1, separation confirmed. Horus 1, separation confirmed. RS-2, separation confirmed. Constellar Sky B2, separation confirmed. Varda's W4, separation confirmed. Pulsar IOV, separation confirmed.
It's your great call out so far for those payload deployments. We've now got just 2 minutes until the final payload for this deployment sequence.
And we did get some cool views of some of those CubeSats and microsats being deployed there. We should be able to see more during the rest of this mission. And as Tyler mentioned, we are just under a couple minutes away from the last payload deployment in this batch. There's going to be 3 batches, so we're still in the first batch of deployments and have 1 more deployment to go. Once again, if you're just now joining, you are watching the Transporter-14 mission. We're currently in the first batch of deployments of 3. We've deployed 29 payloads so far. We do have 1 more to go coming up
Dragoon,
here.
separation confirmed. All payloads in the first deploy event successfully separated.
And great timing. That confirms the first batch of payload deployments is now complete.
Next up, we are going to coast until the 3rd MVAC relight, or SES-3, which should occur at about T plus 1 hour and 41 minutes. Until then, enjoy the space views and the space jams.